satin. I'm the master of my trade. Shed the warp and fly the shuttle. Beat the reed, the weft is laid. I can wind, fly and bobbin. I can warp a beam and thread. I can weave a linen blanket fit to grace a royal bed.
Good afternoon, Westfield, and welcome to this week's Story Assembly. So last time we met, I told you a story, a fable by Aesop. It was thousands of years old, and it had become one of those stories that had been passed around the world from generation to generation. And I wonder, actually, year 6, that's a word I know that you were thinking about in your reading, generation, this week when I popped into your classroom. Generation, thinking about the people who have come before you, so your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents. Other stories exist around the world that have also been passed around from generation to generation, so they have existed for thousands of years. And the story that I'm going to tell you about today is a Greek myth. So I know that in year 5, last term in your history, you were learning about the Greeks, and you probably did learn some of their stories, some of their myths. So a myth is a story often with a quality that's connected to either a god or a goddess, and it has some sort of message or meaning behind it, usually a warning around some sort of argument between the gods that might affect the people. So this ancient Greek myth is the story of Arachne and what she did when she met the goddess Athena. So, the story of Arachne. Arachne sat at her loom, weaving brilliant threads into wonderful patterns. She smiled as she worked and sang a happy little song. People in her village and from all over the country came to see the beautiful things this young girl wove. Arachne loved hearing them tell her how clever she was, and she grew very conceited. Conceited means kind of proud, and thought that she was better than everyone else. I can weave patterns, better patterns than anyone, even the goddess Athene, she boasted to an old woman. Hush, Athene may hear you, whispered the woman. I don't care, Arachne said loudly. Now, everyone knew that it was very dangerous to talk about gods and goddesses. If they heard something they didn't like, they could play nasty tricks on people. Not only that, but Athene was known as the goddess of weaving, and to say that you were better than her would be blasphemous. But at that moment, Athene herself appeared in the doorway of Arachne's house. Arachne leapt up from her loom and knelt in front of the goddess of weaving, looking proudly up at her. I think I heard you speak my name, said Athene, and I've come to see your weaving. She smiled, but her voice was so icy. Everyone watching scurried away in fright. Athene looked at the weaving on the loom. Yes, she said, I have to admit, it is very good. Could you do better? Said Arachne boldly. We shall see, answered Athene. We will have a competition, you and I, and then we shall see. Athene and Arachne set to work on their looms, weaving away for days. They used the brightest threads and most unusual patterns, and at last the 2 pieces were finished. They took them off the looms and laid them down by each other, side by side. Everyone came to admire them and tried to decide which one was best. Athene stared at the 2 lovely pieces of weaving in silence. Then she screamed with rage. Although she would never admit it, she could see that Arachne's weaving was indeed better than her own. So she grabbed it and ripped it from top to bottom. "As you are so clever at weaving," she screamed at the terrified Arachne, "you shall weave forever, and no one will ever want you to weave." She tapped Arachne lightly on her shoulder, and the girl dropped to the ground. And as everyone watched in horror, she shriveled into a small dark blob. She grew 8 legs and ran away into a dark corner. Athene had turned Arachne into a spider. And from that moment on, Arachne and all her many descendants have woven beautiful webs. You may even see some in dusty corners or sparkling in the dew in the morning. And did you know that the proper word, the scientific word for a spider, is an arachnid? And that comes from the ancient Greek, Arachne, and that's connected to that legend or myth. So, quite a tricky one, that one. Some people behaving really not very nicely in that story. I don't think Athene or Arachne behaved in the way that we would encourage at Westfield. I wonder what emotions or feelings you think Arachne felt in terms of how she thought about herself and her weaving, maybe how that might have changed at the end of the story. But also, I wonder what feelings and emotions Athene was feeling, and how did she deal with those emotions and feelings? And perhaps, what else would have been a better response? What else could she have done? I'll leave those thoughts with you, and I'd always be interested in hearing your thoughts and responses. Take care, Westfield. Bye-bye.